Hi, I'm John Wenrick, President of the Evangelical Covenant Church. I'm glad that you've joined us today as we engage in a topic that is on all of our minds. How do we not only survive, but actually thrive in this season of pandemic and global loss? The title of today's session is Leading Meaningful Ministry in a Post-Pandemic World. We all long for a time when we return to a world that is normal. Even though we cannot predict the future, we can have a mindset of post-pandemic in that we realize that COVID-19 has changed the world. It has changed the ways that we relate to each other, how we work, and how we live. It has put churches and church leaders in challenging situations, high stress, anxiety, and financial pressures. At the same time, there has been tremendous opportunity to show and share the good news of Jesus. The uncertainty of times has helped some people realize that they have a need for a Savior who is greater than them. The basic needs of survival have caused individuals and churches to rise up and meet the important needs of daily life. There are innovative efforts happening. Today, we have a special guest who will help us think through these challenges and opportunities. Dr. Ed Stetzer is a professor and dean at Wheaton College, who also serves as executive director of the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center. Stetzer has planted, revitalized, and pastored churches, trained pastors and church planners on 6 continents, has earned 2 master's degrees and 2 doctorates, and has written hundreds of articles and a dozen books. He is the regional director for Luzon, North America, and publishes research through Mission Group. Stetzer is a contributing editor for Christianity Today, a columnist for Outreach magazine, and is frequently cited in, interviewed by, and writes for news outlets such as USAToday and CNN. He's the founding editor of The Gospel Project, a curriculum used by more than 1.7 million individuals each week for Bible study. His national radio show, Ed Stetzer Live, airs Saturdays across the country. He serves as teaching pastor at High Point Church in Chicago and has been the interim teaching pastor at Moody Church in downtown Chicago. Let's meet Ed Stetzer right now. Hi, Ed. I'm so glad to see you. Thank you so much for joining us in this session today. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm good to see you. I was hoping that during the time of isolation you'd have grown that goatee out, but we're going to take it one day at a time.
Well, we just manage these things one day at a time, as you said. So, hey, let's just dive right in. Ed, in your role, you speak with many church leaders. What are trends that you're observing as a church through this global pandemic?
Yeah, so one of the things that we tried to do at the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center is we really wanted to lean in very quickly, and I'm just like for every church who's watching, every pastor who's watching, that your budget in January is irrelevant. Matter of fact, if you're even referring to it, you're just wasting your time. Every budget's irrelevant. Every plan's irrelevant. So we kind of scrapped our plans a little bit earlier than other people did. I had come in January. I just had come to the conclusion this was going to be the most significant event in our lifetime. And so I actually, personally, I just started a crazy exercise and weight loss plan because, one of the comorbidity factors for is obesity. And so so my wife said, "You're pretty serious." Yeah, I've lost 54 pounds since we started this.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And so, but part of it is then we shifted. And so we have been asking churches. So we've actually done 2 surveys of about a couple thousand churches each. We've been asking churches to send in resources. We've developing and sharing those resources with people. So, of course, immediately, some of your pastors and leaders might have watched a Facebook Live I did maybe 3 months ago now, where it was called "This Is Not the Crisis." And because, phase 1, and we actually did a presentation from this 4 phases of the crisis. Phase 1 was pause and pivot. So what did people do then? I mean, that seems like 47 years ago in COVID time. But, we had to learn to get online, and, some, Christian covenants across the country. So you'll have some places that are meeting, but most places are still not meeting. Particularly in some states where you and I are located, there's still, struggle and tension about that. But so very quickly, we learned that online is not best just simply done like this, right? This is fine, but we need more interaction for church. And so then everyone started learning about online church platforms. Hopefully by now people have partnered with Life Church, an evangelical covenant church, and they have their resource at online.church, giving it away free. Talked to Bobby Grunwald. We launched a podcast just all about the crisis. Talked to Bobby Grunwald, and they had tens of thousands of people signing up a week. So people learned that you needed online church interaction. I'm just finishing up my interim teaching pastor role at Moody Church, 3 more weeks as of this recording. And we didn't, Moody Church is a radio church. People have heard it on the radio. So we had, our streaming was Facebook. And, so that wouldn't work. So we now switched quickly over to, and now are on that Life Church platform that they give away free. So everyone learned that. I think quickly people learned that you're going to have to find ways to connect with people. Great. And so Zoom and meetings that are more personal. I talked about how early on people needed to think in terms of 3 concentric circles of ministry. One is, there are people in your church who have, pre-existing conditions, who are older, who are vulnerable. And so there's kind of one. So, the scriptures teach, do good to all people, especially those of the household of God. So there's that. And then there's a second level of concentric concern, though. And I think for us, that should be our neighbors and our immediate community. So, I knocked on the doors. I took my Lysol. I've got my Lysol even down here in my studio. Took the little Lysol, rang the doorbell. So they saw everyone has Ring now at my neighbor. And so rang the doorbell. And my neighbors don't have internet. So they don't have any means to keep up and keep in touch other than these things called telephones, which, my kids don't even call each other anymore. So can't text them. But so that's a second level. So our neighbors and engaging them. But, one of the things, we both live in Chicagoland, is there are disproportionate number of people impacted by this virus who are in already marginalized community. When things get bad, it always gets worse for the poor. And so for us, we've engaged our homeless community. The counties are really good. I'm not sure what county you live in, John, but the counties are really good with the school districts know where pockets of poverty are. And we found an openness to school districts like never before as we partnered and served with others. So again, 1, online. 2nd, how to serve more broadly. I could give 10 more lessons. But what we did is we went through this PowerPoint. Matter of fact, I'll show it to people. It's called 4 Phases of the Crisis. Now, for most of us, depending on where you are, we're in like phase 3 in Chicagoland. Dr. Burks at the time of this recording just a couple of days ago said Chicago, LA, and DC are the right now the hotspots. So here we live in the hotspots. But what we did is we sort of built out some PowerPoints that we gave to churches. So this is so that churches might have and share about sort of how to go through the phases of the crisis, where we are on the curve, flattening the curve. And I already mentioned phase 1, pause and pivot. But for some of you who are covenant churches, you're in Montana. You're in Utah, you're in wherever, and you're not. You're still now preparing and planning for what could be a greater community spread. So we talk about different levels of what's coming and how to deal with these things. We even give a good neighbor bingo card to help people take, good processes, missional best practices with social distancing. Phase 3 is engage and execute, things you need to do. And, John, before you and I came on the call, you were talking about crisis leadership. We talk a lot about crisis leadership. And then finally, phase 4, recover and reemerge. And then the big question becomes, well, how do you do that? So we actually built out a whole resource. Again, we make stuff to share for free for people. The recover and reemerge is actually, let me get the right PowerPoint. This is a whole different PowerPoint. We did a whole PowerPoint on recovering and reemerging and kind of the steps to walk through that. And the end result is, what that ultimately looks like. And so I keep saying I'm going to share that, but I don't. And let me try one more time, John. All right. So this is that PowerPoint. And we're talking about now where it's really tricky. And we're asking a whole new set of questions. There's an article written in Medium and then picked up by the New York Times about the hammer and the dance. The hammer is the shutdown. Right now we're living in the dance, and it's going to be a roller coaster between now and until we get to some sort of vaccine or herd immunity. So all kinds of things people are learning now. How do you open? How do you not open? How do you right now, John, you're seeing this, I'm seeing this. I got people yelling in my ear that we're cowards for not opening, and I got people yelling in my ear that we're not paying attention to the science if we are opening. And how do you navigate that? By the way, all those PowerPoints and lots of other videos and resources, a podcast we launched, are all found at edstetzer.com/resources. My name, edstetzer.com/resources, all for you to download, use, whatever you might find helpful. Sorry, I probably answered that question far too long, but there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot going on, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. That is so helpful. And you've been so generous with sharing those resources. And on behalf of the Evangelical Covenant Church, thank you for all the ways you've influenced us. You know, when you look at churches that are doing well, actually, in this crisis, what are some of the marks of churches that have actually thrived through this global pandemic?
Yeah, so some of the marks are pre-existing marks of finances. So this is not something they did well. It's something they were before this hit. So our kind of 2 waves of research thus far, done on a convenience sample, but a large sample, almost a couple thousand church leaders. We found that rural and urban churches are being hit disproportionately hard. And whereas suburban churches, again, not surprisingly, are doing better. I'll give you an example. Those churches that had online giving are doing better. And also, too, keep in mind that the unemployment crisis is mostly, for now, a crisis of the lower middle class. And so it's easy to miss, right? Most people watching this video have not lost jobs. They are in some sort of structure. And if you're in a church where people were already online giving and you're primarily white collar, and white collar companies have not laid off disproportionately yet, as blue collar or companies have. So what's happened is if your church is more in a lower middle class situation, you've seen huge economic hit. We found more than 10% of the churches were down more than 50% or more in giving. I mean, that's stunning. And so we think, I mean, at one time we asked, will your church make it? We think 6% of churches were in danger of closing in that survey. Now, again, since that time, we had the CARES Act, and some churches took advantage of that. So what I would say is how are churches doing sometimes had to do with their footing before they came into this. I think how are they doing too also has to do with how they've engaged, right? So my kind of crisis video that almost 200,000 people watched, it's Facebook Live I did. I actually did it. This is before I didn't know how you could even do Zoom through Facebook. Now I know you can do that. So I'm like holding my laptop and pointing at the laptop saying, look at this here. And one of my staff says I look like Josh Laxton. He helped make all the PowerPoints we're using. Well, he said that I look like Doc from Back to the Future saying, you got to pay attention. Anyway, but I think what's happened is a lot of churches have seen that this could be indeed an existential crisis for them. However, they're more focused on serving their community than saving their church. Now, as we're starting to see what reemergence might look like, you and I are in Illinois, which is right now the strictest state in the whole country for churches, and really has no set date where churches might begin to meet again and until after there's a vaccine, which we know could be well in the next year. So churches here are talking a year or more. They could gather. That's a very huge deal for churches. Now, again, I think that's probably going to change. Again, I'm not a doctor, and I didn't sleep at a Holiday Inn Express last night. Actually, I am a doctor, but my kids tell me that I'm the kind of doctor who doesn't help anybody. But right now, here's why that's going to change, right? Churches all over the country are meeting. People in Georgia, some of your churches are in Georgia and Texas and in Tennessee and maybe Sweden. I mean, just historically, we got the connection, right? Here, they're the canary in the mine. And if 2 months from now, people in Georgia are experiencing mass sickness and we're back to an exponential growth, here's what's gonna happen. We're not going to meet for a long time in Illinois. But if, on the other hand, right, some of the predictions that people said about Florida haven't come true and Georgia haven't come true, we don't know. So again, I would say everybody be a little humble that you don't know what's going to happen in 3, 4, 5, 6 months. But here's the deal. A lot of evangelical covenant pastors were part of the missional church conversation. And And I've been influenced by a lot of pastors and leaders. Matter of fact, we did this podcast. So one of the first people we had on the podcast was actually what talked about evangelism was Michelle Sanchez.
Right. I listened to that.
Wasn't it great? And she used the phrase that I have totally stolen. Here's the podcast. And she said, we got to seize the opportunity without being opportunistic. We actually talked about mental health recently, but these are all the podcasts that we've actually gone through. So we're on episode 32, all on how to deal. Well, actually, and I guess Bobby Grunwald, also a covenant pastor, all on how to deal with this. Marco Rubio, a senator. I mean, just crazy. But here's what I would say is the reminder that we are seeing and hearing from people too, what churches are doing well, back to your question, is showing and sharing the love of Jesus right now in what I think may be the most receptive time in our lifetime. I'm among them. Now, again, you know me long enough, John. We've had meals together. We fellowship. I'm not the guy of the extremes. I mean, you know, all the missional church prophets who say, this is it, the church has changed forever. And, you know, and I don't think a church has changed forever. I think the most likely scenario 5 years from now, we're going to look like we did last year. But what I would say is that for us, this opportunity to share the gospel is evident and clear. And might I say, in a way that evangelical covenant churches have often led the way for many of us, is to do so in ways that both show with deeds and share with words the good news of the gospel. So I think those are some ways that churches are doing well. I would say that my biggest concern, and we actually talk about this in the PowerPoint that I mentioned, my biggest concern, and is probably different than people think, it is not that churches will never be the same. They're all going to be changed forever. I've heard a couple of, missional church people say they're always, this is it. We're never going back to the large church. The large church is done. I've heard that for 30 years. But in this PowerPoint, by the way, we go through all kinds of stuff like how to lay out seating. What about children's ministries, surveys? But my biggest concern, these are missional concerns, is that we don't lose the external focus that God is calling us to do. And we are doing more so right now. And so my biggest concern is that the church actually won't learn long-term what God is teaching it. Because I mentioned the missional church conversation. Lots of evangelical covenant church people in that, and I think that's great. But for 20 years, we've been writing books and angsty blogs and angsty podcasts saying, the church has got to get out there and leave the building. And in about 3 months, God did what 20 years of podcasts and blogs didn't. Mm-hmm. And so our call, I think, is to help our churches serve their community and share the gospel in them and keep doing it 2 years from now when everyone else wants to get back to normal.
Yeah, and I so agree with that. In the Evangelical Covenant Church, we talk about proclaiming and demonstrating the whole gospel. And I love that phrase, we show and share the good news. And we believe those are like two sides or two wings of an airplane, and we need two wings on an airplane to help us fly: proclamation and demonstration. So right there with you.
Amen. Both rooted in the mission. I mean, that is the mission of Jesus.
Right.
In Luke 4:18, he comes and the people he speaks of are marginalized, hurting people. And in Luke 19:10, he says he says that he came to seek and save the lost. So he announces his ministry, talking about go to the marginalized. That's serving the hurting. He reminds people, I came to seek and save the lost. That's ultimately God, proclamation and demonstration. Love that emphasis.
Yeah. So Ed, you get around a lot to churches.
I used to. Now I sit in my basement and talk to people.
Yeah. We're all there right with you. So could you share just like one inspiring story that you've heard that you could share with us today?
Yeah. Just actually, I was texting back and forth with Derwin Gray. And so Derwin is actually a pastor in North Carolina and South Carolina. He actually bordered his campuses on both sides. And he texted me, and we're just good friends. I preached down there. I was supposed to preach down there in a month, but of course we're not doing anything anywhere right now. But so he sent me a kind of a list of just how much they've been able to do, and I love it. And so what we're seeing is churches are the biggest thing that I see that's so cool is churches. We've all heard the cliche, at least I've heard it since I started in ministry, started here in the 90s. It's not about your seating capacity, it's about your sending capacity. Can I assure you, it's not about your seating capacity right now, is it? Matter of fact, one of the things we're struggling with, John, in Illinois and other states, is that governors are often measuring who can meet and who cannot meet based upon a set number rather than a capacity or the ability to meet safely. So your seating capacity doesn't matter right now, right? So I can have 10 or I can have 10,000. But what matters is, and I really care a lot about how we emerge from this. So I wrote an article in USA Today, kind of right at the beginning of the pandemic. I wrote an article encouraging churches not to meet for the sake of the vulnerable back when that was controversial. And then that decision was made for us. But boy, did I have people mad at me when I suggested that we might do that just for the caring for the vulnerable. But so I wrote this article in USA Today, and it's sort of, let me just pick it up here, and I'll share it on the screen. So it sort of gets at my hope. And here's the article itself, and you can actually kind of scroll down. You can tell I was looking at ergonomic computer screens. You can always tell what someone's looking at last. So it's always dangerous, but it's good. It's good. The problem is I can't let my daughters on my computer. They certainly have messed up my Amazon suggestions. But if you look on the screen, I gave the example of Eusebius, and everyone sort of had a plague example. And we want to be careful. This is not like the plague. Martin Luther wrote about the plague, and it was wiping out whole communities. And this is very serious, the most serious crisis in our lifetime, but it's not the Black Death. So, but that's kind of the example. Eusebius didn't identify the plague. But here's what I saw that was so helpful. As a result of the Christians who were doing gospel demonstration and gospel proclamation, right? As a result, Eusebius concludes, the Christians' deeds were on everyone's lips, and they glorified the God of the Christians. So here's the thing. One of the things we learned, John, is we learned last year that the world keeps saying to us, if you Christians just did good deeds, we'd be nicer to you. We'd like you more. And we found that wasn't really true. And we found that when that wasn't really true last year, when the Salvation Army was on the front page of every newspaper as kind of a bigoted, small-minded organization. Okay, so we know that you can define yourself. Most people don't even know the Salvation Army is a church. You do, but most people don't even know that. So we know that you can't convince the world by your deeds. And I'm not going to try. Here's what I'm going to do. I want marginalized communities to know that the people of God were there. I want our neighbors to know that the people of God were there. And I think churches that are doing well, that are excelling right now, are those churches that have said, it's not about us. First few words of purpose-driven life, it's not about you. Boy, what an amazing time to say it's not about you, so that God will be glorified. And the end result is they will glorify the God of the Christians. Maybe not those with the powers and the levers of influence in society. But, Christians have never done well winning over those with the powers and the levers. So let's descend to greatness, focus on Jesus' mission, show and share his love. And I think that makes all the difference.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about those new opportunities that may be available to us as a church that may not have been available to us before COVID?
Yeah, one of the podcasts we did, and I forget if it was, there were a couple of them that kind of were similar. We're talking to pastors who were learning from one another, and it was either Jenny Stevens, who's at a local Chicago area church, and what is that? What is his name for church? Soul City Church, or it was Rick Warren, and I forget who it was, but they both, or maybe both of them, said in the podcast that you want to look at two things. You want to look first at partners. And I think it was Jenny said, the partners right now are open in the way they've never been before. And so, school districts who would say, well, we can't have a church delivering food for us. Because you probably people know this. I grew up and we were on public assistance at times, but I was always on school lunch. And that's how sometimes people would eat a meal or two a day. And so the schools know where the pockets of poverty are, particularly that those with children. So all of a sudden, there are these partners that were not willing to partner with us before, but in a disaster, they're willing. And then in doing so, we want to be faithful. Again, back to Michelle Sanchez in the podcast, said, seize every opportunity without being inappropriately opportunistic. Love that phrase. So I think but the other thing, either Jenny or Rick said, was that you had partners and then you got to start some new programs. Because what happens is, I talked to 4 pastors, just pastors you never heard of, and what do they do in churches of 200 or 400 in the podcast? And one of them said, it was really super helpful, says, probably most churches our size kind of have a lane. And our lane is ministering to kids in the schools who experience poverty. So we do the backpacks, people do different things. And so that's our lane. And what we found is, and this was probably a month and a half ago, what we found is our lane, we stayed in our lane and we were strong in our lane, but we needed to go into some other lanes. And what we did is we kind of went lanes that were adjacent to ours, and because other churches were in different lanes and they went to lanes adjacent than theirs. So I think everyone had to sort of expand their care portfolio and their care focus. One of the things that, John, you and I are, and we preach, and, I'm an interim and you do stuff like that. But, for pastors, this has been a really, really stressful time. And I think shockingly so. People were like, hey, no Sunday services. You only work one day a week anyway. I mean, pastors didn't say that, but people said that about them. And then all of a sudden they're like just stressed out. I think partly because of the care needs of people in congregations and communities. So a lot of good things going on. We published a bunch of articles. What we would do is I would just tweet out and say, hey, send me examples of what you're doing in the community. And then we'd produce an article about it. So if they we link a lot of these things. I apologize for keeping to refer to other resources, but we're having a short conversation and there's a lot of stuff that we've tried to just put out there. So let me share that. Let's go off the podcast here. So here's the main site for our coronavirus resources. We partnered with Saddleback's Peace Plan, Rick Warren, and the Humanitarian Disaster Institute with the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center. And you'll see all kinds of things. How to keep the main thing. I talk some about states needing to talk to churches. How do you pastor the bereaved during the crisis? Short-term and long-term effects in the church, relaunching the church. And we just create resources here. Well, I mentioned the podcast. This is coronavirus. You can see it up here, coronavirusandthechurch.com, including, might I say, some evangelism resources. Opportunities now to share the gospel, CDC resources, preparing your church with webinars. So I think all of those things together turned us all into crisis leaders that, I mean, John, you and I, we walk through hard times. You're a denominational leader. I'm a academic and a center leader at Wheaton College. I mean, there are hard times. We've all led through crisis, but wow, we didn't know it'd be a global crisis. But this is our moment. This is our opportunity. And I think the Lord's using churches and Christians in powerful ways.
Yeah, I agree. We never had a crisis leadership course at seminary, did we?
We didn't. Okay, so let me tell you something fun fact, okay?
Yeah.
So we are actually launching for the first time at Wheaton College kind of an open course that I'll be teaching with some of my peers on crisis leadership. And we'll actually launch, it's going to be like, going to grad school, wherever it may be, it's in North Park or Wheaton, wherever, it's going to be expensive. We're going to do it for like, a fraction of that, broadly invite people to. So we're super excited about that because I actually do some crisis leadership consulting, and I've never had the opportunity to teach pastors because I never needed to. And now we need to, because this was not a sprint. It's not a 500 meter. It's a marathon. I don't know. Again, I've heard some, missional theorists tell me that's the end of whatever. For 2,000 years, Christians have lived in epidemics. Matter of fact, still do in most of the world, and pandemics for 2,000 years, and they've made it through. I was preaching on Easter at Moody Church, and some of the pastors had I've probably been there. That's that big, amazing, largest non-columned amphitheater in Chicago, empty, just empty. And we had 10 people because that's what we're allowed to have. Governor Pritzker in Illinois has declared churches to be an essential service and limited gatherings to 10, which is basically our camera crew. Now, I got to recognize the typical church in the U.S. is under 100. But my point is this, is I looked out there on Easter and I could have been discouraged. And then I remembered, there was a guy, Paul Rader was the guy's name, 100 years ago, who preached to Moody Church in the midst of the Spanish flu, which by all measures is disproportionately much worse than this.
Right.
And the gospel was preached, people were served, and Moody Church is known for serving the poor and the hurting. There's a sign built into the wall, ever welcome in this house, strangers and the poor. And we'll get through this, people have for 2,000 years. The question is not, will we get through this? I think the question is, will the Lord find us faithful in this crisis? And I'm going to be among those. And I know so many evangelical covenant churches are that say, here I am, Lord, send me. And we go towards the crisis, not away from it. I shared one of the things at that site, edstetzer.com/resources, is a sermon that I preach that people are using. And it's just, it's just generic. Hey, thanks for having me at your church. But, a lot of people are tired. And in there, I have a picture of my grandfather's fire battalion chief badge. He was the fire battalion chief for Manhattan in New York City. And he always used to tell me, we're the ones that run towards the fires. Well, as followers of Jesus, we're the ones that run towards the crisis. And in doing so, we stand on the shoulders of our foremothers and our forefathers because they've been doing it for 2,000 years. We need to do it today. Gospel demonstration and gospel proclamation.
Yeah, that's great. I'm thinking of the tribe of Issachar who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. So I've been thinking about everyone wants the COVID curve to flatten,
Yep.
but I hope that our innovation curve doesn't flatten.
Yeah.
I hope that continues to go up and to the right. And maybe a more biblical way of saying that is when the Spirit is pouring out new wine, the old wineskins can't contain it. We need new wineskins. So could you just comment on what is the new wine
Yeah.
that the Spirit is pouring out on the church, which we need new wineskins to contain that new thing that God is doing?
Yeah, first, I don't drink in front of other people, so I don't know any of those things. Um, so yeah, so it's a little tricky because I don't think we know yet. Let's play out a scenario, John, where you know there's no vaccine for hundreds upon hundreds of illnesses, including there's no vaccine for certain viruses. And so there is a scenario by which this is a permanent part, uncyclical nature of our ecosystem from now on. Not likely, because you got things like herd immunity. But again, it's probably that I'm not a doctor again, but it's probably that you have some immunity after you get it. But don't miss this. Um, but there's people who are getting it again. So imagine the worst case scenario where there's no vaccine and there's no immunity when you get it the first time. Well, we're probably going to be dealing with, and one of the things we talk about in that PowerPoint is kind of being an accordion church. So, right now, Chicago, LA, at the time of this recording in DC are the hotspots in the US. You're living and I'm in Chicago land. We're living in hotspots. So particularly just restrictive things. Okay, but Georgia, pretty wide open. However, Albany, Georgia is a big hotspot. They had a big funeral there, and so what happens is you're going to have to walk into a level of flexibility we've never seen before. Where, and let's not talk super big churches, but just a normal church of 100 people, and then you get a ruling. We only have groups of 10. We got to slow community spread. So boom, you're shrinking down. That's family units and maybe some friends, or maybe it's 25. And so what you may find, I mean, you're going to be at kind of a really difficult level of flexibility for a long time. However, man, what a great opportunity, to your point, what a great opportunity to see women and men lead groups and ministries, which, by the way, right now, I believe the Lord's raising up hundreds, maybe thousands of people as pastors that nobody considered as pastors before. And you're watching this work, and they're just doing amazing work as small group leaders who have now been empowered to lead and to care and to minister. And when this is 6 months from now, we're going to start saying, hey, you really had an amazing giftedness here. Have you considered that maybe God's calling you to pastoral ministry or some full-time vocational ministry? So we might be raising up a whole lot of men and women to these new roles that they'd never considered before. But this crisis showed them that God had gifted them. I'm preaching now. So I think the importance of smaller community and ministries is going to be drastically elevated. I think that God's going to be raising up people through this crisis that are going to be the church planners and the pastors. And by the way, if you had to decide today to be a pastor of a church of 500 or a church planter, you should have picked being a church planter. Let me explain. Because right now, as things begin to emerge, you start a church with 100 people in a room that seats 250 or 300 in a lot of places. Don't send me letters. I know it's different everywhere. But you can do that. Church of 500 in a room of 600 probably won't meet for weeks or months. And so what freedom is there? So there are going to be church planners raised up. There's going to be a greater sense of empowered ministry pushed to the edges of church life, right? I don't know what, the covenant has this fascinating, liturgical streak. And so right now I'm getting asked, a lot of people are asking me about, how do we practice the Lord's Supper? How do we partake in sacraments or ordinances? And so we had just a conference call with people in my community, and our Anglican pastor said, we just can't. I mean, we're not doing it online. We're waiting until we come together. And, and then the low church Pentecostals are like, man, we're having everyone bring some soda and some crackers, and the Baptists and the Wesleyans are all in. Here's the thing. I don't know, but here's to the degree I can. I want to push right now every function of church life to the edges of church to empower people. So if in my tradition, There's some practices that they could meet in groups of 20 and practice. In my understanding of church, it's not something I do alone, but maybe I've got 25 people and I'm practicing that. And somebody's baptizing somebody in a group of 25 people. That's two house groups, two life groups that are meeting together. And that she or he then 3 or 4 months ago, just finding that empowerment, the beginning of a journey to ministry that could be really powerful. So lots. I'm actually, I'm a little, as somebody has a comorbidity factor, and was a germaphobe before this, I'm a little, I'm super careful, right? I wear the mask and the whole 9 yards. And so I'm super careful for me personally, but I'm super encouraged. And if in the midst of that, I get sick or someone else gets sick, if we live, we're the Lord's. If we die, we're the Lord's. But there's a sense in joy and expectancy in my heart, and I think yours and lots of pastors, that God's doing something, and we want to be at work where God is already at work, where the Spirit's moving, where Jesus is at work. Again, he says, as the Father has sent me, even so send I you, John 20:21. We respond like Isaiah, here I am, Lord, send me.
Yeah, I love that. And Ed, I've been praying for a global revival
Yeah.
and a great awakening, as I'm sure you have and many other people have. What stories or what can we learn from the global church here in North America? And I think there's a lot to learn from the global church.
Absolutely.
What do you think about this?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The global church, I'm one of the people who's written a lot of times. For example, a lot of people always say we got to learn from the global church. And one of the things we got to learn from the global church is their passion for orthodoxy and their desire for engaging in mission. But a lot of times, not you, but a lot of times when people say that, they forget those two parts. And I really think those are essential. Here's what's different about this, as one who's written a lot on how we got to learn from the global church, is we're actually the global center of this pandemic. And so in a lot of cases, what do we learn from the Chinese response? Well, the Chinese government could react in ways that you just couldn't do here. But the Chinese Christians who already have been harassed and persecuted, but it's different levels, different parts of China. They were the ones giving out what we call now, not what everyone knows as personal protective equipment. I didn't even know the phrase PPE now, or the initials. But those Chinese Christians in the midst, they're passing out PPE on the street when they know that people are coming by, taking pictures, security concerns, privacy concerns. So what I think we can learn, and right now in Brazil, I'm doing a conference in Brazil. I think it's in a couple of weeks, because they're now, I think at the time of this recording, they're the number 2 right now in the whole world. In Russia, these places. So how they respond, in some sense, they're asking us, how are you responding? And they are saying, and I'm encouraged. I heard from Brazil said, it seems that American Christians are responding well. That's not a phrase that I hear a lot. So I was excited about hearing that phrase. Now, again, I'm not saying everything's gone well. We both could point to, we should get together and have another, the restaurant we went to is now closed, doesn't even exist anymore.
It is, yeah.
So what I would say is, the rest of the church has experienced epidemics. Like we've been in a bubble since the Spanish flu. We haven't seen a major. There was a Hong Kong flu. There's some things, but we haven't seen. But in Africa, epidemics flow through pretty regularly, and the Church of Jesus Christ says we're just going to keep living for Jesus, showing and sharing the love of Jesus. Let's learn from them. Let's learn from the church in Brazil, which really takes an approach of integral mission, a holistic approach to ministry that fits so well right now. They're not sitting around saying, so how do we make sure that we do both caring for the needs of people and we share the gospel with them? They're just saying, how do we join Jesus on mission? Yeah. So, but I would say it's interesting because a lot of the world's looking at us right now. And there's been there's been too much showboating and too much, making a focus on American Christians and maybe their rights. I'm not in that boat or camp. I am in the boat or the camp that we've got to, there are real questions that need to be asked and answered. And in Illinois, we got to ask and answer, how can we work better with the governor, to communicate with the governor, and other states as well. But for us, I think ultimately we're right now what the rest of the world is wondering how Christians here are going to respond. And that's a mixed bag. But historically, we can look at how they responded to epidemics and occasional pandemics. And boy, what an historical learning journey that is.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Earlier you talked about church planting. And you may know this, but a few weeks ago, we had our first online church planting assessment center.
Wow.
And
On
yeah,
assessment. I think
and
that may be an historic first.
and the Holy Spirit helped us discern two new couples to plant churches. So my feeling like, hey, as long as the Holy Spirit continues to call people to plant churches, we're going to continue to plant churches even in the midst of this crisis.
Yeah. So, Charlie Dates, who you would know, just local from Chicagoland, he's pastor of Progressive Baptist Church, old historic church. And we were James Meeks, who's pastor of Salem. These are large African-American churches, those who don't know the community. So we were doing a TV, James has a TV program like every night. I mean, his church, he's like the godfather of Chicago churches. And so, so we were just, we were having this conversation. Mark Jobe, who's president of Moody Bible, was there. And so it's Charlie, me, James, and Mark. And one of the things that that people asked, well, what does it mean for ministry? Do we just pause? And for some reason, I had been reading the history of Progressive because, there's this, question, there's a historic connection. We got the Progressive National Baptist, a whole national black denomination. So anyway, so I was reading the history and I looked, and Progressive was started during the Spanish flu epidemic. And so I mentioned that, and Charlie was like, yeah, I'd like to think, well, I read all the history of all the churches. I literally just had been looking at it. And so it's interesting how much, and can I just tell you too, there are all kinds of companies right now being started that are going to be major companies 50 years from now, major global concerns 50 years from now. Because you said earlier, we got to keep innovating. What I would say is church plants, if you're thinking about planting a church, this may be the time. Because first of all, the size fits the kind of the need of the moment. People are open. People say, well, we have to gather online. Well, I mean, I think a church is going to eventually need to gather with feet and faces, not just electrons and avatars. But you can certainly start right now. And what a conversation to have with people, and what a story to tell, like Progressive, that in the midst of the Spanish flu or in the midst of this global pandemic, we shared the gospel, we planted a church, and then we got on mission and continued to reach people. So again, I don't want to be, it comes back to Michelle's comment about seizing the opportunity without being opportunistic. This is a really grievous time. I talked to a friend who has had 10 people die in his church. And again, it's not, depending if where your church is, historically where evangelical covenant churches is a mix. But there's a lot who are in more rural areas who have not been hit. But one of the ways you've grown in diversity and really led the way in teaching many other denominations on that. And right now, if you talk to African American pastors, it's a very different conversation about the impact of this virus in their communities than it is in my community and a lot of the pastors listening. So you kind of see the distinction between the two. But so again, I don't want to. There's no glee here, right? I mean, the Evangelical Covenant Church's engagement in, care facilities for the elderly has been known as a wonderful ministry forever and hard hit right now.
Yeah.
And so we're grieving with those who grieve. I mean, New York Times putting on the front page of the paper, I mean, there's, 100,000-ish people and more to come. I mean, we're not there. So what I would say is, in the midst of that, we grieve with those who grieve, and we join Jesus on his mission in the midst of that. We can do both together.
Yeah, that's good, Ed. And when you were talking, I was thinking about Promised Land Covenant Church in the Bronx, New York, led by Pastor Michael Carrion. Last count, they've lost 13 members to COVID.
Yeah. And he was in, of course, Washington Post story, and stunning. And he was on a radio program I did. And first of all, just so thankful for covenant pastors like Michael Carrion and lots of others. So for him, it's just constant. I mean, that community there in South Bronx is the hardest hit, I think, zip code in the whole country. But here's the thing, I don't want you to miss this, right? We're not done. So there's gonna be other hotspots. And it may also impact disproportionately in communities of color.
Yeah, and just as a denomination, I want to switch now to denominational thinking. Yeah. We created the Financial Relief Initiative. So Michael and his church was one of churches now who are applying for a missional relief grant to help pay the funeral expenses for those families that are grieving, who may not be able to afford to pay those. So we're coming alongside our local churches through this financial relief initiative. So When you think about denominations, again, we don't want to be opportunistic, but we do see this as an opportunity to show and share the good news of Jesus. But switch now from a local level to a denominational level. Like, what advice would you give to the Evangelical Covenant Church in terms of thriving as a denomination during this time?
Well, my first advice would be that you are being disproportionately impacted. So one of the strangest things to me is typically we're saying, remember I said earlier, if you made every budget in January is irrelevant today. And you want to recreate those. And what we're finding is that it's typically down 10, 15, 20%. Now, again, it's real difficult to get an exact number, and there'll be scientific sampling. Our sample, it was a large sample, but it was drawn from email lists of ministries that would like exponential, where they might have a disproportionate number of people who were online giving, things of that sort. Here's what we know, though. We know that there are churches, like I probably 20%, 25% of the pastors I talk to are saying our giving's up. We actually have up. This is an opportunity for you to partner with the Evangelical Covenant Church and to do things, because I'm a believer in denominations and denominationalism. I wrote the cover story to Christianity Today literally to explain why denominations matter and are important, which again was very surprising to a lot of people. But I would say I can list things that have come and gone, global things that were going to change the world, but the Evangelical Covenant Church is still, the Assemblies of God is still, the Wesleyans are still. So what they do is they create the opportunity to partner, to engage in those who are disproportionately impacted in a crisis, like you are through this church grant program. But also, too, it engages in an opportunity to care. Right now, we're experiencing a significant number of pastoral struggles and crises like we've never seen before. And when you have leaders at a district level and a national level who are helping with that, now we actually created a resource for this, and it's called resilientchurchleadership.com, partnered with the National Association of Evangelicals, and powered by Church United and National Christian Foundation South Florida. And we brought in some ministries to help with soul care and crisis. So we've got Mindy Caliguire from Soul Care. We've got Replenish with Lance Witt, and we're just putting all these resources to help pastors who are in crisis. Now, again, we've actually got phone numbers for pastors to call to get help immediately if they're in a crisis that's deeper. We National Suicide Prevention Hotline, but also other numbers to call as well. And so, one of the reasons we're doing this, disconnected pastors. John, pastors in the Evangelical Covenant Church know who to call. They are going to call their district supervisor, their leader. They're going to call your office, and they're going to say, "What I got to tell you, with the rise of non-denominational evangelicalism, now over 30% of evangelicals are non-denominational. They don't know, and in the midst of the crisis, they don't know to whom to go." And I get the calls, and I'm like, "Well, have you called your denomination?" "Well, I'm not in a denomination." So what I would say is, denominations need to think well about how they use their resources. They need to be good stewards. They need to be, more network, less bureaucracy, all the things that you've done and we've talked about as you've walked through this. Okay, so healthy denominations matter, but the community that denominations form in the midst of crises, they become some of the most important times. Now, we have a special, the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center, we just kind of have a special, I think, relation with you guys because your national headquarters is just down the road, and we often joke that our Amplify conference looks a lot like the Evangelical Covenant Church national meeting because so many of you have spoken at our conference. But we need these kinds of partnerships, and I think we're going through waves. And in the 50s, everyone was in a denomination, and in the 90s, everyone decided maybe they shouldn't. And by the time we get to 2020, there's a huge shift. But I got to tell you, I'm talking to a lot of pastors and leaders who are saying we got to form a network where we can have community and accountability. And I said, let me tell you about some networks that have actually been around for 100 years. And they're creating, because here's the thing, we're given the Great Commission, we're given the commissions of Jesus, and I think they're given to the church, but no church can do it alone. We need to do it with others. So, for example, your global missions endeavors at the Evangelical Covenant Church, I know that as churches are resetting their budgets, that they're having to make hard decisions. Please don't deprioritize God's global mission in the midst of this. They were sending missionaries out during the Spanish flu. They were sending missionaries out during the Great Depression. We still need to prioritize those things. And we do that through partnerships of things called denominations or, and some denominations don't call themselves a denomination. The Assemblies of God says we're a network. And of course, denial is not just a region, not just a river in Egypt. It's a denomination. You're a denomination. There's connectional and there's loose connections. Evangelical Covenant Church has a fascinating history of connectionalism. But for us, we need one another, and we never need one another more than when we're in crisis. And so what an opportunity for a denomination to shine. And you and many others have, and I'm thankful for you.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. And two of our guiding lights in this crisis have been shepherding well and stewarding well.
Yeah.
And that's helped give us a framework or a paradigm for making decisions and discernments about how to move forward. And I too, am so grateful for the covenant. And we have a ministers crisis fund. Julie and I just sent a contribution to that a couple of weeks ago because we love our pastors so much. And so again, we're doing our best to both shepherd well and steward well during this time.
Awesome.
You mentioned, this is a hard time for pastors, and almost overnight we went from on-site to online. We saw a lot of attendance grow. One of the challenges, how do you go from clicks to bricks and maybe have options, all along that time? But when you think about pastors and crisis leadership, what are 2 or 3 behaviors that you would like to take this opportunity to say, hey, if you're going to do 2 or 3 things in crisis leadership, these are the non-negotiables? What would you tell our pastors and lay leaders in the covenant?
Yeah, Lem, I actually I had some of that on there, that in the midst of crisis leadership, we sort of have to focus differently. And so what we kind of frame that in terms of, let me just share just some things you need to think through, because let me share it here. So some practical stuff, right? You need to think through policies and procedures regarding safety precautions. I never thought about these things before at this level, communication of new protocols. So communication has to go way up. You should be double, triply communicating where you were before. Finances, right? So mission is the church's mandate. This is what we're here for. It's not that your church has a mission. It's that God's mission as your church, and this is our focus. So we have to retool even with our finances there. We have to think in terms of ministry models, right? So these are ways we're rethinking things. Remember, Sue, I talked about the accordion church, right? A lot of states, not ours, John, but a lot of states are talking about capacity rather than number. And so what does that look like? So you're having to say, and you're having to lead in a way. I won't go through all this sort of stuff here, but let me give you an example, right? Right now, depending on where you are, now we're in a state like in Illinois where we're recording, but I know pastors are watching all over the world, like Illinois, that people are in general, particularly upstate, more like, well, we just need to wait. I mean, nobody said, when this became more political, it said, you got to open right now. You didn't see a rush to that in Northern Illinois because we know where we are, right? We're in DC, LA, whatever it may be. But right now, here's the kind of leadership you're going to need. You're going to have people who think that you lack faith and you don't take seriously religious liberty if you don't start meeting. And you're going to have people who think it is reckless and dangerous and you don't care about your communities. As a matter of fact, one of the dangers I see is we're seeing in some communities where communities are now seeing churches as a threat to their health. Well, that's really undermines gospel mission. But then you say that and people are like, well, no, you've got to do this. No. So here's leadership, right? So right now, a lot of pastors and churches sent letters out, right? So, and I'm collecting some of them. So I've got from large churches to small churches, because almost everyone said something just, I don't know when this releases, but a lot of people said something just after the president said some things, and then some district courts made some rulings. This may be the most challenging thing to your leadership, because there are a significant number of people who think this is an overblown nothing burger, that this is just a flu and no big deal. And there are some people who lost loved ones, and themselves can't go out. So here's what I would say. I'm helping. I'm going to write an article on this. I haven't yet, but I'm helping coach pastors and church leaders that you've got to kind of walk a path. You're going to talk about Romans 14. You're going to talk about how here we are going to make the decision. This is how I'm encouraging churches to communicate this. So I'll actually kind of use the words that might help with it. So I'm encouraging pastors to communicate this by saying, hey, listen, we have in consultation with our county and our state, which by the way is where most health work is done in the United States, the federal government gets involved in a global crisis, right? That's the only time you see them. Mostly it's county and state. I would say in communication with our county and our state, we have some forward opportunity to do this. So we might meet at 25% or meet at 50% or follow these protocols. However, we have also decided as the elders, I think evangelical covenant churches have elders a lot, so there's different language, vestry, board, whatever, trustees. So as elders, we have sought and discerned in a time of prayer what the Lord would have us to do. So we therefore have decided, because remember, some people are going to be saying, we should just have it open, everybody here. And it's a growing number. And so we have decided under the Lord's leadership for our church that we're going to, and it might be open with the following protocols, these doors in this way, out that way, people wearing masks, nobody sitting within 6 feet of anyone other than their family unit, right? And then you're going to say, because there's a whole lot of people who think that wearing masks is a sign of compromise and cowardice right now. And so you're going to say, we recognize that people have different views on this, but this is the time that God has called us as elders to walk this together, and here's what we've decided. So if you decide this, that we're going to have masks in church when we open, whatever it may be, or if you already are open, you need to say to people that this is the decision for our church. If we think that this honors, if this is what you decide, we think this honors the older congregation or people with asthma and others who can come, maybe people are on chemo. We recognize this is not a decision that some of you have made in other events, but this is what we're going to do. We're also recognizing that we have to have only 25 or 50% capacity. So we're actually having, call them tickets in other settings, but we call them, seat reservations. You have to make those ahead of time. You're going to find people in this very divided society get upset on either side. And so you say, so this is what the elders of your church, who you have placed into this role to help make these moments. And we ask if you feel unsafe, or you might even say if you're older and you have certain pre-existing conditions, you might not want to come. If you have illness, you might not want to come with signs. But then if you're at the place where you can't follow what we believe the Lord has led us as elders to do, we ask that you continue to worship with us online. So that's leadership, right? Now, here's the deal. If you went into pastoring because you thought everyone would like you, you have chosen badly. If you don't have 5-10% of the church mad at you at any given time, you're probably not doing significant things. If you have 70% of the church mad at you, you probably need to slow down a little bit. So you're going to have some people mad at you, but you're going to have to lead through this. And you've already seen some people who are restless on either side. You're going to have to communicate with them. So make a wise decision, over communicate that decision, lead your congregation through that decision. Tell them here's the thing, everything's week by week now. You know what the big difference is in Illinois? We're going to have a very different conversation in Illinois at the end of June. Because if Georgia is filled with sick people because they went to church, we're going to have a very different conversation. It's not filled with sick people because they went to church. We're going to have a very different conversation. So you take 1 month at a time and say, this is what we're going to do for the next month or next 2 weeks, and then lead people through that. So leadership here, whole different level of leadership. But let me tell you, this is really key. One of the things and John, you as you pastored and planted, that you want to really pastor a family, lead them through a crisis. When you've sat by the bedside, when you have done their funeral of someone that they loved, on the other side of that, you're their pastor forever. Maybe not before, but you're their pastor then. And what I would say is this is an opportunity for literally hundreds upon hundreds of covenant pastors to lead well in crisis so that people afterwards will say, we saw our pastors, our staff, our leaders, our elders, they led well through this. And even when we disagreed, they honored us. They laid out where we're going as a church, and the end result is your leadership will be strengthened by the time this is done, and you'll be able to be used of the Lord in new ways.
Yeah, Ed, that is so inspiring and so timely and helpful for what all of our churches are thinking through right now as things begin to open up a bit. And as you said, it varies state to state. Hey, we're coming to an end here, but I did want to ask you one more question. Like all good stories end where they begin. And you mentioned at the beginning of our time together, you lost 50 pounds and you knew you were at risk. What are some behaviors or some words of wisdom that you would give to pastors during this time in terms of practicing self-care? We make a big deal of self-care for our pastors in the Evangelical Covenant Church. But what are some words of wisdom and inspiration that you could give to our pastors regarding self-care?
Yeah. So again, keeping in mind, it's kind of like, you lose 50 pounds and people are asking me, well, what did you do? And I said, well, for the first time in my life or second time in my life, I was successful at weight loss. I am not the person to which is not what you're asking. I'm saying, but that's kind of what happens. And so I've actually created a little Facebook group that I haven't really launched yet, but it's called Fat Pastors. Because I just think we need each other. And, pastors are so self-revelatory. The only group you could form called Fat Pastors, you couldn't say like fat barbers, or fat, people wouldn't do it, but pastors like, that's me. I mean, everyone sees me. And, I know lots of your pastors and they've seen that I have a weight problem. But for me, I in January, I was just reading, and when I kind of read some of the early comorbidity was with obesity. I don't know what clicked, and it just clicked. But what I would say is, we need you to finish. We need you to go across the finish line with us together. And I think, a lot of us were sort of, shook by this reality, Darren Patrick's death. And Darren, the last few years has made his ministry about caring for pastors. And so it reminded me, and I try to remind others, that we need this self-care. We need this journey. And again, so that's why, we launched this Resilient Church Leadership Initiative. I mean, it's kind of a strange thing, the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center. But I think a lot of pastors are close to crisis. And let me be a little self-revelatory myself. And some of it was fun, some of it wasn't so fun. So, but I'll tell you the fun part in a minute, but I got 3 daughters, and quarantining together, which I will tell you they're 15, 18, and 21, and they have so many words, and it's just and I think they're awesome. So we had a little road trip yesterday, first time we've been out of the house in 3 months. Went safe, wore masks, the whole 9 yards, but the pressure on them, the stress on them, I had to pay more attention to. My middle child graduated high school without a graduation. My oldest child, all her friends disappeared from college one day, just shut down. Everyone went home after spring break. I would guess similar things happened at North Park as well. And then all of a sudden the stress was there. And so I made a joke with Donna. Donna's my wife, and she's an introvert. I'm an extrovert. You probably tell that. And so I said to her, the first 2 weeks were kind of shut down, and then the president extended it another 4 weeks. And so I said to Donna, I said, hey, so, 4 more weeks of kind of, isolating at home. So is that like a good thing for an introvert? And her response was, just with a smile, she says, so are you going to be here all 4 of those weeks? So, and I got to tell you, we were fighting over stuff, and it was really strange because we've got this great marriage. And then I felt the stress, the days are no longer like, I don't know the difference between a Friday and a Sunday and a Wednesday. And one Tuesday, this was about a month ago, I just sat down, felt overwhelmed, and just wept. And, and I say that, I mean, I'm not generally that much of a weeper. I think that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Maybe during Disney films with my daughters, but I just was like overwhelmed. And I said, I got to get a different rhythm. I got to get a rhythm, forget a different rhythm. I got to get a rhythm because all the rhythm was knocked off. So yesterday I took a day off, but that's something we didn't do at first. And I saw a rising stress in my life. I saw rising tension with my family members. I saw shortness with some of my staff. And I said, okay, we got to stop this. And then I had to say to my staff, okay, listen, I know this is like do as I say, not as I did, but is everyone okay? And then now we actually do what we call a mental health check, just kind of, hey, how are you doing? How's this? Because I think everyone has probably some higher stress, maybe some low-level depression. I mean, this is a big deal. And it's okay to lean on other people. So, you've got great structures in the Evangelical Covenant Church. Resilient Church Leadership is just a resourcing site for ministry, including actually, we can do about 30-hour-long. We have to use the term coaching because of licensing stuff. But if you're in a difficult situation, I mean, not a life-threatening situation, you should call and reach out to the National Suicide Hotline or others in that case. But we're actually finding that we can resource pastors as well. You can through the Evangelical Covenant. I would say that we got to create a new rhythm. That rhythm has to include the very things that we would teach people for, 10, 20, however long in ministry years, that you need some margin, you need, daily time of rest, you need to, divert some time away. You have to do that. And I know it's a crisis, but for most of us, It's not a war. For health workers, it may be that level. And we know that even in a war, soldiers need rest time, and we're not at that level. Thank God for that. But we can't, if the end result is we have a secondary crisis among caregivers like pastors, that doesn't help you. It doesn't help anybody. So take those choices, work with the Evangelical Covenant Church and others to make the wise decisions, to create a new rhythm, to balance, I recognize for some of us, Mindy Caliguire, who leads soulcare.com, she used a phrase I really found helpful on our last call. We do a weekly call to help resource pastors. And she said, I try to build the gap between the jet fuel drinkers and the candle lighters. And, and I like that. I thought that language. And for some of us, we need to slow down and be that candle lighter and, just not think that we can go 12 hours a day and try to rescue everybody.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yesterday was Memorial Day for the time of this recording. I took a 3-hour nap yesterday.
Wow.
And I felt a little weird waking up, but Julie said, "Did you have a good nap?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And
awesome.
So just taking that time to care for ourselves, because as you said earlier, we don't know how long this thing is going to last. So it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Ed, this has been so helpful. And we have links on our website, on the Evangelical Covenant Church website, to your resources. We're so thankful again for all that you're doing, for all the ways we're partnering in the gospel. And I hope that continues to grow in the future. There's more that the Holy Spirit wants to do in and through his church.
We love the Evangelical Covenant Church. Thankful for your leadership. Even though our restaurant doesn't exist anymore, let's get together after when we're allowed to be in groups of 2.
Sounds good. And would you be willing to just give a prayer blessing to the Evangelical Covenant Church?
I would.
Thanks.
Father, I do pray that your hand would be upon the women and men of the Evangelical Covenant Church. Lord, I thank you for how much I've learned from them. I thank you for how they've led us in ways that we might grow in holistic mission, integral mission, care for justice, care for a diverse church. Father, I pray that during this time, you would first give strength to pastors and leaders who may be weary. Father, I pray you'd provide for churches that may be financially struggling. I pray for our communities, that our focus would not be on even just only the survival of our church, but ultimately rebuilding of broken communities. I pray that the Evangelical Covenant Church would indeed thrive. That, Father, you would work in exceeding abundantly beyond all we might ask or think in and through your churches. Lord, we thank you that you tell us you've chosen the church to make known your manifold wisdom. And Father, I pray you'd use the pastors watching to this webinar, the churches that they lead, for your glory and honor, that they might show and share the love of Jesus. They might be about gospel proclamation and gospel demonstration in what may be the most open time of our lifetime. So, Father, use them. Allow us to lean on you. Thank you for the opportunity to provoke one another to love and good deeds, as the writer of Hebrews says, that we've been able to do today on this webinar. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks so much, Ed. God bless you.
Thank you, John.